We recently had some questions about uh, surface pattern textures, and this is an orthopedic example that we were using where we wanted to place some bump textures on an object so we could use them to help grip as you put a piece in or out. So you want to place bumps along the surface. So obviously there are ways of doing this by just using the manual brushes in here if you wanted to manually create um, textures this way, and you can apply them with just stuff like this. This isn't going to be a perfect example, but you'll see here. So if I touch off on that, and then I can dictate the heights that I want it to be, and you can preview it. So you can make these manually, but what we wanted to do is a pattern. So the first thing you would immediately jump to in Freeform is the ability to emboss with a wrapped image. So if you had this pattern here, you could select an area and place bumps inside of it, right? But you notice I did that on the end here. One issue that we run into, if I go ahead and get rid of that, and let's say that I want to do it on this whole leg like this. If I use that tool, sometimes you run into issues here where you'll see that it struggles to apply that pattern to the whole area there. So I have a way around it that I came up with here. So one thing you can do is we can create plane on the bottom, and then you can move that plane. Just move it up a little bit there so it intersects the data. And for this application, this tended to work. So if I take that plane and I come up and I can intersect a plane with clay here to create a curve. And then there's another option to do multiple slices. So if I select that and I say I want to do like 20 slices and I want to flip the direction. Now let's just up that to maybe 40 slices. So now if I hit apply, it'll create curves around all of those. And then what I did is I just created a sphere. So if I come up here and I grab my construct clay and convert to a sphere, whatever size that I'm looking at creating, just create that out in space as its own piece. And then we can use pattern piece to do that. So what I can do is I can select that as my pattern and then select all the curves that I want to pattern. So I can tell it, actually let's exit out of that real quick. Do this one more time because I needed to select the right thing. So I'll go in and select pattern, select my object, and then I needed to dictate that I was going to use multiple curves. So if I grab all these curves and tell it to use all of those, and then on here you have to make changes so it follows how many copies I want. So let's just say 20 per, 30 per, 40. So this was an alternate method to where you could actually create a pattern, and obviously I would have made a smaller sphere. And then you can adjust the spacing and the scale. A pattern around that, and then you just create it and then Boolean that away from the surface of the model. So that's one method that you could do something like this. Now, while we're in the pattern piece, I wanted to show a couple other options for patterning just to give you an idea of how patterning works. So if I just turn those curves off and come back. So what I started out doing in this video is doing a single curve pattern. So if I just grab this object and then tell it that I want to pattern it along a single curve, obviously that's simple. You can dictate how many that it will follow it, and you can do it that way. But another thing that's really interesting that you can do is you can pattern all over a piece randomly, which is kind of interesting. You can come over and say I want to pattern with this, and I can select an object, and then I can tell it to pattern pieces all over the surface of this part. And right now it's set to no grid offset, so let's just do it on the surface. And you can do like a U and V spacing here. So if you wanted to create some sort of randomized pattern, you could do this all over the surface. Like that. So that's kind of interesting. So one other method is using a CAD surface to create a pattern using that same tool. So if I use pattern piece, I come over, I select my piece, I select my CAD face, and then you can adjust the spacing and it will follow that surface. And create a pattern that way. So you can see how that works. So being able to fit those on CAD surface is really handy. And you can just keep adding instances until it fills it up. And then hit OK. And it will create it. So those are just some of the pattern tools inside of Freeform that are really handy to use for different types of modeling techniques.